This is the third of a series of lectures on the topic of Enrique Dussel's text from 1975, The Philosophy of Liberation. We move now to chapter 2, which is entitled From Phenomenology to Liberation. We saw last time Dussel is using some terminology in non-standard ways. He has different understandings of the term ontology and metaphysics, for instance. Same is going to happen here with the term phenomenology, as we will see. Now, he starts the chapter by mentioning that there are 6 levels of reflection that we can undergo. The first begins with an idea that's important to him: proximity. Proximity. We start life, we start our existence in nearness. But as we live, we become more and more distanced, both from things and from each other. So we start in proximity, but then we start to move apart from each other. And as we move apart, we attain what we've learned as totality, this idea of a world, a referential system of significance, as Heidegger would say it, the system of meaning, being with a big B, that places each thing in the interpretive space and gives sense and value. So that's something that happens gradually. It's not something we do necessarily as individuals, although we're implicated in this, but an idea, a set of lenses, an ideology, an understanding of being and totality develops where things fit and things don't. That's a process of our moving away from proximity. And then we reach a stage of reflection he calls mediation. We make ourselves with and among things, including other people, insofar as they have sense and value according to our project. And our projects are determined in large part by what's possible in our world, what among the things that count as being. Now you can hear an echo of Zubiri here, right? When he says that we make ourselves as agents, actors, and authors among things and with other people. It can be taken directly out of the book we looked at, Man and God. And then there is the next level of reflection, exteriority. Our project itself turns into being, into system. It becomes the horizon of meaning. And in our world, some people get pushed out. The exteriority gets generated. And that leads to the next level of reflection, alienation. Those exterior to the system get designated non-being or are oppressed, but as they indicate a vulnerability of the system, they get repressed. Remember what Ayakriya says: if you want to be immersed in reality, you got to look for where it's broken. You got to look where things are leaking, where things are on the fritz, where things are not what they say they're all about. But that makes the system vulnerable to what got exteriorized. And the system doesn't like that. The system tends to repress, to tamp down, to forget about, to pretend it's not happening in order to maintain the serenity and the dependability of the system, the project. And that leads to, and hopefully could lead to, a further level of reflection, liberation, determining something new with others as others and subverting that system of oppression that results in exteriorizing people, that results in alienation, of becoming estranged from ourselves and from others. Dussel wants to distinguish between phenomenology and what he's going to call epiphany. Phenomenology, just the term, is something that it's a school or branch of philosophy that developed in the 20th century, particularly around the thought of Edmund Husserl. He didn't strictly invent that, but he's the one most associated with the idea that what philosophy ought to be doing is describing what appears. Phenomena is what shows up, what shows itself. Ology is a study of, so it's a study of the way things appear, the way we experience things. And Dussel is starting with that. He thinks of it as that which concerns what appears and how it appears, beings, entities, things that count, in terms of that world system, in terms of the totality, in terms of big B, being. If you've studied any of the thought of Martin Heidegger, particularly in his work Being and Time. He says philosophers are always thinking about beings with a little b, entities, things, but they never think about being with a big B, what it means to be as such. He says we've forgotten the meaning of being with a big B. We've forgotten about that. It's not even a problem for us anymore, Heidegger argues. And so we go through life uh, thinking that there are certain things, certain entities, certain beings that just are the way they are, not realizing that the beings, the entities, these things show up according to what being as such is all about. And it is very possible that what being is that allows things to show up in one way versus another may evolve or change over time. Could be. That's what Dussel is going to focus in on. The things that show up, the phenomena, the things that show up according to a kind of a scheme. According to certain kind of structures. Call that the totality. Call that the world system, the referential system of significance, what matters and what doesn't, being with a big B. Things have their determinate place in the space, remember that's a battlefield for him, of the world horizon, or they are excluded or do not appear at all. Right? Phenomenology, the ability to see things, the ability for things to show up, depends on a horizon or a context or a gestalt. That's that metaphor I like to give, shining the overhead projector against the screen. If I took the screen and the wall behind the screen away, nothing would show up. So the question for Dussel is, what's that screen all about? How was that constructed? What is it allowing to show up? And what is it excluding from showing up? Epiphany, on the other hand, remember, red is right on in these color-coded slides you may be looking at. Epiphany is the revelation of those who transcend that system, that world, being with a big B, those lenses, who are exterior to the system and whose revelation questions and threatens the system. And who is that? Well, it's the same group that Aakriya is talking about. It's the poor and the oppressed, the ones that don't count, the ones that are excluded, the non-beings, the nothings of this world. That's an epiphany, an appearance, a shining through outside of what ought to be possible to be seen according to phenomenology, which is, again, a negative term, the way Dussel looks at it, and not just another branch of philosophy as Husserl would look at it. So proximity, he says, is the point of orientation for philosophy. Modern philosophy, he argues, it privileges what can be seen with the natural light of reason. That phrase, the natural light of reason, is shot through all of modern philosophy. How do you know that? Well, it could be seen with the natural light of reason. Well, that example of that would be Descartes' cogito, the I think, which I just know. I just know through the natural light of reason that I'm a thinking thing, an abstract, non-natural, immaterial, invisible, something or other that's thinking, thinking substance. He said, well, that's what I could see clearly and distinctly, as he puts it in his works. The natural light of reason. Well, is that natural light of reason natural? And is that natural light of reason always reasonable? Those are the questions that liberation philosophers, and not only that, they want to ask about modern thought. Philosophy of liberation, he says, privileges place, spatiality, proximity or farness, center or periphery, and to relationships, personal and political relationships. It begins, he says, with an encounter with somebody beyond the world of ontology or big B being, beyond the world that's already set up, structured, and determined already who counts and who doesn't count. It's an encounter outside of that mechanism. He distinguishes the term proximity from proxemic, which again, in my color-coded notes, indicates something that he's negative on. Proxemic, according to Dussel, means getting physically close to something as a thing, to take it, or sell it, or buy it. He says the problem is we treat people like things. And there's a little echo of what Zubiri said about how we treat other people. We could treat other people as other, or we could treat other people with the emphasis on people. When we treat other people as other, we learn that we treating them as if they're part of the background, the furniture of reality. In the convenience store, the difference between the cashier and the cash register is immaterial. They're things. They're just other than me. But when we treat other people as people, we get close to them. We come close to them, and that's the word proximity for Dussel, approaching another person as person. And to do that, it implies some kind of risk. You know how it is when you meet other people. You're putting yourself out there a little bit, as are they. It takes a kind of vulnerability to really get close to in the proximity, as Dussel would say, of other people. And he says this proximity is prior to any signification or determination or labeling or, oh, she's one of those or he's one of these. It's prior to all that, anterior to all that. And he says, really, it's characterized by a primordial, a fundamental responsibility to the other, the one who's not me and not necessarily part of my project or my plans. That's what he means by proximity. So I've put up a graphic for you to take a look at that kind of explains this. And let's start on the right-hand side with beings or things. The things of the world, the beings of the world, that which counts of the world, they get to be that way because of the context, because of the horizon or the framework or the ideology or the lenses. We've been using these words kind of interchangeably. What Heidegger would call being, or what Dussel would call the world system, because it's a certain kind of structure. It structures what will be seen, what can't be seen, what will count, what won't count, what will matter, what won't matter, what has being and what's a nothing. But he says prior to that, anterior to that, is what he calls this primordial proximity, the closeness that humans have prior to getting labeled, getting classified, getting organized, getting structured prior to that. Now we'll elaborate on this graphic as we go through this talk. He writes in 2142, anterior to the world is the people. Anterior to being, with a big B, is the reality of the other. Anterior to all other anteriority is the responsibility for the weak one, the one who as yet is not. A responsibility of those who procreate new persons, parents, or new systems, heroes, or liberating teachers, as he understands it. So now we can elaborate on this graphic. In the world, beings or things are entities as placed, where everybody has a place, and you can tell who's up and who's down, who are the winners, who are the losers. And the place is determined by the world. And world always means here, as Heidegger would put it, the referential system of significance, the interlocking meanings of what counts and what doesn't count. That's what turns different things and people into what they are. Prior or anterior to that, though, Dussel says there is reality. Before any of that happens, or the people, before they get put into groups and labeled and characterized and put into place and determined to be winners and losers. And even anterior to that, he says, is a primordial fundamental responsibility to the other, to that which has no being yet, the not yet, parents who bring other persons to be, and heroes who bring other societies to be, and teachers who bring other ideas and visions for the weak and the not yet. Proximity is that place where you find this anterior relationship with those who don't yet have being, who have not yet been determined, who have not yet been structured. And part of, I think, what Dussel wants to say is fundamentally all of us, although we get structured, although we get labeled, although we get characterized, are not fundamentally that which got characterized or labeled. We're not equal to our place in society. We show up that way, but we transcend that. We're metaphysically exterior even to those labels, even those of us in the center. Archaeology is a term that gets used in philosophy as well. Arche, the Greek word for the beginnings or the first or the principles, is about trying to figure out where we came from, what our origins are. So there's a kind of a philosophical archaeology that we might do. And Dussel's answer to that is we come from proximity, not from proxemics, where we're just getting close to things in order to manipulate or leverage them or use them or buy them or sell them, but in that primordial proximity to the other person. And he also talks about eschatology, which is the other end. It's where we're headed. Eschaton is the Greek word for the last things or for the fulfillment. And what would be that fulfillment? Again, I think it's proximity. Right? We're trying to get back to where we were. Proximity without farness, he writes, without economics, without contradictions, without war. Love without law, as Caputo might say, and this idea is might sound beautiful. Let's get back to as close as we are before the labels, before the emplacement, before we get organized and structured. Let's do that. For a thinker who has argued strongly against the dangers of utopian philosophy, where you try to do philosophy, try to figure out what's really going on and how it might be better from no place in particular, some abstract place, he said, well, that's either futile or dangerous. And yet there's an element of the utopian in this eschatology, this trying to chart where we're headed, trying to chart what fulfillment would look like, that also does seem to be utopian. It seems to be an overcoming of place where there's no place anymore. And I think that's a challenge for us to try to think through whether that's possible. The philosopher Jacques Derrida, as elaborated by the philosopher John D. Caputo, talk about the relationship between gift and economy. Gift and economy. Now, a gift is supposed to be just freely given and freely received, no obligation. Like if I give you a gift, I don't stand there tapping my foot going, well, what are you going to give me? A gift is a gift. I give it to you. But there's always economy. And for Derrida and Caputo, economy is exchange, where there's an agreement, so to speak, that's been made. It might be tacit, might be explicit, but there's agreement. I do so much for you, you do so much for me. But gift is not supposed to be a part of economy. It's supposed to be beyond economy. This is a big deal, by the way. It might not seem like much. In our ordinary lives, it's kind of a big deal. If you give somebody a gift and they don't give you one back, you think about it a little bit sometimes. Or if you give somebody a gift and you really aren't expecting anything back, but you put a lot of thought into that gift and you give them that gift and they take it and they go, huh, okay, thanks. Like they don't show a lot of emotion. They don't show a lot of appreciation. You go, wait a minute, you owed me a great reaction. You owed me some appreciation. You owed me a thank you. That's economy. And anytime, around the holidays, you always do that. I mean, we got kids and grandkids is always like, well, whatever you do for one, you got to do for the other. And what are they going to think? It's all about economy. It's all about exchange. It's all about trying to work out agreements so everything's, treated just so. But a gift is a gift. It ought to be free. Theologically, it's a big deal. God's grace. If we are, as a Christians, some Christians will hold this very strictly. If we are saved by grace, or creation was by grace, it just means free. It's gratuitous, right? Even gratuity is the word, a big word for tip. And gratuity is supposed to be like something you just give freely because of the wonderful service. But that's not how we treat it. I mean, don't stiff your waiters and waitresses, please. Don't do it. It's bad. If we get, especially now, don't stiff them. Tip, give a gratuity. You feel obligated to give a gratuity. That's economy. That's not grace. That's not gift. That's not freely given, freely received. The question is, for Derrida and Caputo, is, can you really separate those two? Maybe gifts have to be part of economy. Economy is always implicated in gifts. Can anything really ultimately escape exchange, escape what Dussel will call the world system, an ideology, a structure. Can anything ever get really outside of that? Uh, Another way of asking is, can we really get outside of language? When we talk, we use words, and those words can and are used as labels, as organizers, as the that which structures our experience. Can we get outside of that? Well, if we say we can't and we give up on it, then we are stuck with proxemics. Then we are stuck with only economy. Then we are stuck in a system that allows no more freedom. It can't breathe, doesn't let the air or the light in. So it's important that we head towards this, head back towards this primordial proximity, I think Dussel would say. Now, so what's our praxis supposed to be? That thoughtful action, increasing proximity, shortening the distance between us. A person is not born in nature. A person is not born from hostile elements, nor from stars or plants. A person is born from the maternal uterus and welcomed by maternal arms. One person is born from another and is given security by her. That's the beginning. That's proximity. That's as close as you can get, right? And we lose that over time to these structures which divide us and categorize us and put us in our places and make some of us winners and some of us losers. Everything that happens after that distances us physically, mentally, conceptually, economically, and politically. So our praxis should be to try to overcome that, Dussel wants to say. Proximity is a feast of liberation, not of exploitation, injustice, or desecration, taking people and using them for the benefit of a certain worldview, and that's the benefit of certain persons and not others. Now, again, we can continue to add to our graphic here. The interplay of being, the lenses, the ideology, and the beings, the things, the entities that we treat ontically or proxemically, so to speak, everything with its label, everything in its place, that could be considered the totality. But that primordial proximity, before any of that starts to happen, that exteriority, that alterity, that could be seen as what Levinas calls the infinity, not able to be captured by that circle we try to draw around things and give them meaning. And Dussel maps onto this different notions of what counts as intelligence. So again, we can start on the right-hand side of the graphic here. What counts as intelligence among things, things that have their meaning according to the way the world system at the time says that they do? Well, intelligence is about interpreting hermeneutics in that narrow sense of seeing things as they show up phenomenologically, evaluating them, good, bad, sellable, not sellable, productive, unproductive, judgments like that, evaluative judgments like that. What's the intelligence that's at work in designing, so to speak, that world system or that ontological set of lenses or ideology? Well, that's that dialectical reason that's trying to get everything into place, and anything that's left over gets cut out. Right? There's some advantages to that. There's something to be learned from dialectical thinking, as we've seen. But Dussel wants to get even back before that. Anterior to that is a kind of intelligence that is liberating, he says, that's historical, that's analogical. This is like that. It's not the same as that. It's not identical to that. It's not one more of the same thing, but it's kind of like that, but different. Analectical thinking, that it doesn't fit into that dialectical drive to homogenize everything and bring it into unity once and for all. It's practico-poetic. It makes things, allows things to be, as the philosopher Martin Heidegger would say. It's a kind of Gelassenheit in German. It's a letting things be what they are, not squeezing them into those determined labels based on the world system that we happen to be living in. It's letting other be other. And for your consideration, you might think of that whole right hand side of being and beings and the world system and things, ontological and the proxemic, all those big fancy words. You could think of that as the cave, to bring things back to where we were at the beginning of the semester. That's that cave. that Plato is writing about. That's the shadow world. That's our world. That's the only world we really know. But something escapes that. Something. The prisoner? Yes. But maybe even the people manipulating the puppets and making the shadow show for the cave dwellers. Maybe. Remember we talked about that? How many people have been out of the cave? Maybe everybody, a little bit, knows that exteriority, knows there's something more than what the world system says that we are, says that what we mean, says how much we count. There's more to us than that. And that's what Dussel is driving at here. Ontology, again, that's something he's negative about, moves in the light of the world under the control of reason. Philosophy as ontology means to reflect on oneself, to speculate on or look at oneself as in a mirror. Speculum is the word for mirror. Speculate, look at yourself. It is to look for identity as the origin of what one already is. You're trying to find out what's same about you. And we push that a lot. What's the sameness that we're looking for, as if that would be the answer. And then he goes on to say that ontology then is a phenomenology, right? It's the logos, or a thinking, the logic about what appears, the phenomenon, the being, from its foundation in that world system, that structuring ideology that lets things show up. Metaphysics is beyond that. It's knowing how to ponder the world from the exteriority of the other. All right, if that's what metaphysics is trying to think outside the box of ontology, outside the lenses of phenomenology, how do we do that? How is that possible? That's this question I keep raising. How can we think, ponder from the outside if we're inside? Furthermore, if something were completely exterior to our system of meaning, it would literally not show up at all, not even as epiphany. There would be no way to encounter it. So, to give you an analogy, we have a visual spectrum. We could see from one end of the spectrum to the other, or we have an audio spectrum. We can hear only so low of a frequency and only so high of a frequency, and anything that's outside of that, we are never going to hear. You say, well, what does that sound like? It doesn't sound like anything. We have no idea. We would not know. We would not recognize. It could be going on all around us. It's outside of our ability to encounter it. Well, if there are people, human people, who are truly exterior, there could be no epiphany. There could be no breakthrough. There could be no encounter of any kind. Certainly not a questioning, deconstructing, disideologizing kind. It couldn't happen. So they're not all the way exterior. Exterior still is a function of interior. Exterior is still a function of where you draw the circle. What counts as being with a big B? What counts as the world system, that referential system of significance? That determines what we see. I get it. It also determines what we don't see, but we can't not completely unsee what gets exteriorized. It breaks through, like it or not. It's going to come out one way or another. The contradictions, the injustices are going to bubble up. There's no way around that. So part of that graphic we've been working on, makes me wonder what this primordial, originary proximity, where there's just no horizon, there's just no screen. I keep going back to the idea that, well, with no screen, nothing would show up. So it's what Dussel wants to do, but I'm wondering whether it's an impossible kind of an ideal. He goes on to say, metaphysics is to know how to think about the system, the world, from within ontological negativity, from the point of view of the peripheral peoples, the oppressed classes, the women and the child. Now here, in this statement, I think he's coming a little bit over to the issue that I'm thinking about. Ontological negativity is a big sounding word, but it's what I was driving at a minute ago. What counts as not being is not absolutely non-being, or we wouldn't know it at all. It could never possibly bother us. We could never possibly encounter it. But the point is, we do encounter it. We do encounter it. It's hard to think, at least hard to think, from the position of those who got excluded by our lenses, by the way we see things. It's hard to see with other people's lenses. It's hard. But the question is whether it's absolutely impossible either. And I think here, this idea of ontological negativity means I'm thinking of exterior from the interior, because that's the only place I am. That's the only place any of us can be, including the so-called exterior, the so-called non-being. They're real. If you want to reserve the word being for the labeled, structured, categorized kind of thing, great, but they're real, right? The great masses of impoverished people are real. They might not count, they might not have being or standing, they might be losers, according to the world system that privileges money and power, but they're real as can be. Because if they weren't, then they literally would not be troubling us, but they do trouble us. They are making system, world, totality shake, tremble. Beyond phenomenology, the road of epiphany opens. Revelation, or apocalyptic, of the other through the other's face, particularly the suffering other's face, which is not merely a phenomenon or a manifestation or a presence. In other words, it's something I sort of understand and put aside, but it's he calls it an epiphenomenon. It's vicarious, it's a trace, it's a vestige of something that's missing. It's something that haunts us. It spooks us. It's like a ghost of something that's not completely gone, but not completely here either, that troubles us and makes our hair stand on end and our spines tremble. It's the mysterious. It's of one beyond the present. Ontology, or phenomenology, gives way to metaphysics, the apocalyptic epiphany of the others. He says it does, because in Marx's words, the contradictions, the injustices, just, they won't stand forever. They always bubble up. I on this slide, I kind of summarize some of these things, but I'll just have this quote: liberation is not a phenomenal intrasystemic action. Liberation is the praxis that subverts the phenomenological order and pierces it to let in a metaphysical transcendence, which is the plenary critique of the established, fixed, normalized, crystallized dead. And if you can make sense of all that, that's where I have a question. This is the question I'm raising again. He says liberation is not intrasystemic. It would not, that would be some kind of reformism. We didn't really get rid of the system of justice, but we kind of shifted the furniture around in the system of injustice. Well, okay, liberation is more than the reformism, but he makes it sound like it comes from outside, and outside is where there are no categories, there is no screen, there is no horizon, there is no context. It's anterior to all that, he says. And that somehow it subverts that whole big, nice, neat package that the world system is trying to be. The world system can get subverted, I think. It has been, historically it has been, repeatedly over time, because something doesn't fit the standard story. Something doesn't fit the standard ideology. Something breaks through that. It does. But where is it coming from? Is it coming from this anterior place? I don't know whether that's exactly the right way to put it. But okay, ontology versus metaphysics one more time. Metaphysics is the struggle against ontology. Metaphysics, he says, is radical. It gets down to the roots of things. Ontology is at best reactionary. It just reacts to the threats. It tries to oppress and repress whatever might make vulnerable the system that is certainly serving some people's interests. Metaphysics calls for transformation. Ontology, and that includes what he would think is the tradition of philosophy, defends the status quo. It's ideologization in the negative sense of aikaria. It's obscuring a clear view of reality. All right, so try to keep those two in mind, what he's trying to say there. We'll come back around to those, but for now, let's take a break and we'll pick it up again in the next lecture.